Okay, call the meeting to order. First item, I'll read the or see who's here. And I have a list, so I can read it myself. Dick Benka,
Present.
Ruth Ellen Fitch,
Yeah.
Jeff Rudolph,
Yeah.
Jeff online.
No, he has a work commitment.
Okay, Sergio Modigliani,
Here.
Janet Gelbart,
Here.
Sada Kevin,
Here.
Sarah Markada.
Here.
John Doggard,
Here.
he's one speaker. John Van Scoyac. Is John online? Jesse Hefter.
Here.
And Cliff Brown.
Here.
Okay, so we don't have any minutes. So the first thing is an update on the school, following up on the questions that were sent to the school committee. So Jesse worked with Dick.
School administration.
Pardon me?
The school
Send to the school.
Sorry. The school, school committee and the administration. Is that correct?
I'm not sure the school committee got it, but the school.
I did send it to
The reset, yeah, so yes.
Sorry, send it to the one person who's supposed to get it to them.
Yes.
So Jesse and Dick and Sergio and Sarah and others worked on the questions to try to make them more focused and easier to be answered by a school system that is very sparse in numbers. And I think we got it into a good physical condition. And on Friday, I sent it to the school committee through their contact person, as well as to Bella Wong and who else did I send it to? Karen Schmuckler, Susan Gibbons, and Robin Benoit. Although I hope someone sent it to Robin Benoit because I couldn't get her.
Right. You tried Karen, but that's why I didn't use the much.
Oh, really?
When you tried to type it, it looked like you said Karen, but anyway,
Okay.
I'll make sure she gets it.
Okay, good. I asked the addressees to forward it to them. So anyway, does anyone have any questions? It was in the packet. So if you had a chance to read them, do you have any questions or comments? I mean, the one question is when are we gonna be able to get some answers back? And that I think is gonna be problematic. But that's the world, that's the situation we're faced with. That's the deal with it. Any further discussion on that? No, okay.
So just out of curiosity, you raised an interesting point about short staff in the school department and certainly on the analytical side. It's been several years since they had, data group, and obviously there's turnover. And I guess as it relates to the role of this committee, maybe it's out of our purview, but the need for data seems to be something that is persistent, both for folks in the town school partnership, for the school committee, etc. And I'm just wondering whether or not it's going to make sense for this committee as part of whatever recommendations it does come up with, to make suggestions about things like staffing in that area. And that's one question. The second question I have is, to the extent that the school department remains short-staffed for an extended period this fall, how is this committee going to be in a position to evaluate whatever asks the school comes up with?
Whatever what?
Whatever asks
I'll ask
the schools to come up with.
Guys, you have any thoughts on that?
I think we've had this discussion internally. It is the kind of $64,000 question, right? Which is, if we are to complete the work here in a meaningful way by December, and that is to have a recommendation by the time of the forecast in December, then there's going to be a need to focus and kind of drill down on both the town school ends in the fall to get to that point where we can have with confidence in the accuracy of our asks and in the clarity of our numbers. And so right now, my understanding is on the school administrative side, there are two key priorities. One of which is staffing up, and they're doing a good job of that. You know, they're bringing on assistants, assistant superintendents, and the staff necessary to fill out the senior leadership team at a relatively rapid clip, which is good. And then the other aspect they're currently working on is opening the school year, right? Like getting the schools open. They will also have an enrollment number, a concrete enrollment number by October, which is a metric that will be relevant for us in terms of this committee, in terms of the analysis that you do, the analysis that we on the town side do, trying to evaluate what the potential next steps are there. But that leaves a period of crunch time. And so what we're trying to do on our end is tee up as much as possible in the next 2 months, so that there is, when the school team is able to turn their attention to that analysis, that you already have the information hopefully you need, and have had some of the big discussions you need to have on the town side, and that we've also then teed up the kind of priorities that we need to talk about. We'll talk about a little later today. We're moving on to this question of revenue increases and expenditure decreases. The focus that I've brought to this meeting today is on revenue increases, and the reason for that is because it's not because we don't have expenditure decreases. We have a pretty significant potential list of those that we could lean on if necessary, but I want to do that in conjunction with schools, right? I want to have that conversation together, because I don't think it makes sense for the town to lay out a portfolio of cuts and have nothing on the other. Nor do I think it's fair to the schools for us to lay out a huge amount of asks without the schools having the ability to have that conversation too. So what I'm presenting to you is not today, is not the formal, you've now heard from all the town departments, and we have a list, and we've are now kind of combing that and making sure that all the numbers in that are accurate. But it totals up the amount of the monetary value of the asks that are present there. But I think, as you'll see in the discussion we're about to have, realistically, the town's ask is going to be limited to a lot of maintenance of effort things, and so we will have all of that information in front of you, so that you as a committee can make a decision about what you want that ultimate package to look like, whether you want it to be fully dedicated to maintenance of effort, or whether you want to engage further with the departments and ask questions about, hey, I see you have this in here. What's the benefit of this? What do you think? What do you see the potential savings? Why is this already for you? So all of that, we're now in the process of combing through and cleaning up. Some departments did it in different ways, so we're just trying to get it into a format where you're seeing an apples to apples. This is what it costs. This is what it's for. These are the potential benefits of it. But we're going to have that initial conversation about revenue opportunities and sort of where the first pass on those asks puts us in terms of a dollar value today. And hopefully, going through those conversations, it will give the school team time to do what they need to do, which is staff up and open the schools.
Okay, I see Sergio.
Good afternoon. Thank you all. I think it's worth going back for just one moment to Cliff's initial question. Some of us, and certainly would include myself and others in the room, members of the advisory committee who work on the schools, have, I think, for at least 10 years, struggled with what feels like an historic lack of data. And we have to, I think, connect that with, in the recent discussions in which the school committee, for example, was trying very hard to make some budget cuts. I think many in the school community were deeply focused on the idea of not making cuts in what's called classroom-facing activity. And that is I think to some degree, another word for administration. And I think it will behoove this committee to, as Cliff has suggested, to think very carefully about this question and perhaps help our community understand why administrative cuts that eliminate the ability of the schools to understand their own budget, to evaluate it, to examine alternatives, is harmful to the classroom. Thank you on that point. The other thing that I wanted to ask is that Chaz mentioned an update on enrollment. It would be helpful, I think, for us to understand how that timing is going to work. We know that traditionally, in the past, at least, it's been October before PSB has been able to pull that together based on the start of year. Is that your current understanding?
I defer to Dr. Gibbons when we look down.
Yeah, typically we provide a report to DESE called the October 1 report. It's usually finalized and certified by the state somewhere around November 1st. So our enrollment projections for the upcoming year would be based upon the current year enrollment, which we would have finalized around that time. And why that's particularly important this year is to see how what's happened at the national level, at the federal level, the impact that has on our enrollment. Since a good portion of the churn that we experience is from families that are from overseas. So I'm curious to see how that is going to play out for us this year in particular.
And may I ask, while I understand the two deadlines you've identified, is there any glimmer that will become at least potentially better understood sooner? Because I'm thinking about our schedule and our process and the commitment that we have to the community to try to get some answers within the calendar year of 25. Are there any data points that might be available sooner that would begin to perhaps identify the point you just made, which is, have we been impacted by these changes at the administration, national administration, in terms of academia, research, medical kinds of positions?
I guess to build on that, we know who's going to be in school on the day the school opens, right? And I don't know what the fluctuation generally is between that first day and when the DESE report goes out. I'm sure there's some, but it may be a reasonable starting point for everybody because it's probably not going to be super material. I'd be surprised if it were.
Or we have a historical number for what, X percent incremental growth in the month of September. Because a lot of I know, international students, at least from Asia, the school year operates slightly differently. Or some of the academic calendar is a little bit different. So we would expect that enrollment to probably be at a different time of the year.
We do find that a lot of families come late August, early September. And that's not just that they're moving at that time, it's also that they get their papers together right at that time. So we do see a big change. And it's right now, if we make predictions, it's just as good as anybody else's prediction, because we don't know what families are going to do. And they show up, our guidance counselors in late August and early September are working through, I don't know, I can't even say a percentage because it's different every year, but there's a lot of change that happens at that time.
Yeah, it's significant, the months of August and September. Even students that are unenrolled, a lot of times those families wait until the last minute in order to process their paperwork. We encourage people to, and certainly last year, as we were getting closer to the end of the year, I was having principals, reach out, any family you've heard, please have them contact our enrollment and registration department, and let's get that process underway so that I could have the best information I could. As you know, I did have a few sections that we added and some that we eliminated back in June as a result of some of this, pre-work that had been done. But I don't even right this minute have any good data, better data that I could share. Because the churn is so great and it remains fairly we'll say churny through the beginning and opening of the school year. So that's the part that's hard. I'll be looking at this again next week to see, is there anything more I can do or any additional adjustments I can make? But the other piece too is in the Baker area, we do have Hancock Village and what's going on there and families moving in and out. And not really having any additional information that I could use in a meaningful way to help. I will give you what I have as soon as I can. I do give the school committee an update as we open school, what the numbers look like, and certainly can provide that, but we're not done with the churn then. But it is what we do know.
When is school opening? Because it used to be September after Labor Day.
Yes.
Other districts have moved it back. Where are we in Brookline?
Yeah, right after Labor Day.
Right after.
Tuesday after Labor Day. Yeah.
Okay, Dick?
Yeah, as a practical matter, how sensitive are costs to the numbers that might change between September and October? At that point, I could see that if you add a lot of English language learners or
Yeah.
special education, that would have. But are the numbers such that you would add or drop sections? Or would it just be for basically the special services that might be affected at that point?
That's a great point. So the high school requested the use of sections just last week as they're refining their scheduling. So for, I would say, more of a reg ed classes and sections, I'm hoping that, the next couple of weeks I can, if I'm going to need additional teachers that we can identify them now. And then thereafter, it would be for special populations and what we're seeing there.
Yeah, I mean, it would strike me that it's, as a practical matter, the changes at the end of the summer and the very beginning of the school year would be not widespread in terms of the financial impacts.
That's why I made those adjustments back in June, so we could hire staff where we needed to. And if we were going to collapse sections, which we did, that we're able to notify staff and or make adjustments in our hiring practices timely.
Third year, you still have your hand up?
I just wanted to follow up, I think, on the question Dick just asked and Dr. Gibbons that you've been discussing. I'm reading an implication, which is that given when the data becomes available to the schools, and to your point that you were, because of contractual obligations, you need to make hiring decisions really at the end of the prior fiscal year, May, as I understand. It's probably important for this committee to understand that the changes to the FY26 budget are going to be de minimis. That is, there's very little chance for savings. And if anything, the problem may get worse, not better. Is that an accurate summary, in your opinion?
Yeah, from a budgetary standpoint, I think going into 26, we have a much better handle on what our expenses are and the relationship between the expenses and the programming. So as we enter this year, I'm not as concerned about the impacts of these changes financially. In other words, that we will find ourselves in a deficit situation as we have in the last couple of years. I feel pretty good about where we're at as far as that goes. the implications it has for the future, which I think is, what this committee is most interested in, is the part I'm not able to give you a good sense of right now, because I don't have a good sense of how these other factors are going to play into either shrinking of our student population, whether it's going to stay fairly consistent with what we've seen in the last couple of years. I know that from the work we've done already with enrollment, that we're not looking at some kind of a spike in enrollment in general. So if anything, there may be some shrinkage that happens that wasn't captured when we had done our enrollment projections 2 years ago. So that's the part that's I feel is more tricky than what's going to happen as we open school. We did budget to be able to respond to shifts in enrollment differently this year. And that's proving to be prudent, because as I see things, I'm able to adjust them without jeopardizing our financial position. I do believe that the few sections I have left will likely get used through the course of the year for these special populations as we see them. But as I sit right now, I think it'll only be minor modifications to my regular education sectioning over the course of the rest of the summer. And then what I have for the extra sections will likely be used for special education and ELE. And I'm hoping that we're gonna land, in balance as the year goes on.
You did already ask that question in a different meeting here. And so I just want to confirm understanding of what you said before back to you, is if we look at what went up between fiscal year 25 and fiscal year 26, the teachers' lane steps and COLA had a significant increase. And we do expect, we can look at already our staffing, right? And we do expect to have an increase like you do any year going into fiscal year 27, right? That is what you said.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, from the staffing perspective, in terms of rising costs of.
And our staffing isn't going to change very much between when you said that and September 1st.
No. A nice summary.
Anyway, thank you, Dr. Givens. I appreciate that information. Helpful. Thank you.
Okay, unless there are any other questions, so let's move on to town departmental follow-up. Chaz?
So we have, we've now presented everyone except the select board. We'll be sending you a memo. I'll spoil it now by saying the one thing that the select board office is looking for is to move the budget analyst position that is now dedicated to ARPA and is funded through ARPA onto the town side of the budget. That's our primary ask. It's part of the BFAC recommendations. It's something I've been wanting to do for a long time. But again, that's an ideal, if we had the money type ask, it would contribute to our both long-range financial planning, and I would ideally like that person to serve as a grant coordinator, centralized grants management, which is something that departments have, I think, all talked about the value of in an environment where federal grant money is not readily available. Having someone watching all of our grant applications and ensuring that we're getting those things in on time and managing it is really important. So that's on the select board's end. I want to take the opportunity now, before we kind of delve into a little bit of the summary and where we are, to see if there are any questions from the committee. Any follow-up questions to us or any of the departments generally before we start talking about some of these issues regarding where additional revenue might be located. Okay, obviously that's an ongoing, that's an open offer and an open request. As things go on, if you have questions for us or for any department, please let us know. And we will endeavor to get you an answer by the next meeting. So just send that to Tiffany and myself and we will get that out there. I'm going to share my screen with me if that's okay.
Oh, yep, you should be able to.
Okay, thanks. Okay. So we asked all the departments to total up their potential asks to us. And we conducted an initial analysis. We are still costing that out because several departments did it differently. For example, some departments said, I'm looking at, my current budget in FY 26, and I'm seeing the delta between that and where I'd like it to be in FY 27. Some departments costed out just that difference, put it in there. So in order to ensure that you're getting you apples to apples numbers, that's what we're putting through. But I want to start by giving you an overview of just where we are in terms of the big ticket items that we've been talking about, which is continuity of service. What is it going to cost us to continue the services we have now? And where are the current budget busting items that we know about? And how much are those going to cost? And I want to stress that this is an initial analysis. We are looking at this through a conservative lens. We are doing our best to scrape these numbers and get to the bottom of where we think those cost drivers are. But we will just say, to be candid, right? The health insurance information that we're getting for the next fiscal year is already bad. We're starting to see applications to the state by private insurers, including some of the insurers that are part of the GIC, asking for average increases of between 12 to 14%. Blue Cross asked for more and was rejected. I believe is appealing that. So the increase in costs from healthcare alone suggests that we are not out of the woods in terms of the drain on the resources that are then going to, under the current model, trickle down and impact revenue projections for FY 27. So I'm going to show you this document. I'm going to make this a little bigger. Right now, if we were to start the FY 27 process today, we would be around $3.1 million in the hole. And that is not counting the increased potential costs for police and fire overtime, which combined to put about $1.6 million of costs into the reserve fund in the current fiscal year, FY 25. The asks made by both of those departments to close the gap for this FY 27. For the police, it was $1 million. For fire, it was around 750. We have new obligations under the fire contract that the union ratified that we'll be asking the town meeting to ratify. Those create a mandate at the end of the contractual period that will likely cost around $800,000. We are aiming to defray some of that cost by funding it in the collective bargaining reserve, by making additions now while we have them. With the present, we're trying to take a conservative view of this. So we're putting that in as is at $800,000. We're reducing the amount of overtime asks currently to $500,000 in anticipation of finding some savings there, but still realizing that those issues are structural in many cases, and that we're going to need to increase those budgets by some number. Is it going to be $1 million, $750,000? Our hope is no. But again, we want to take a conservative tack there, which is why we are currently thinking around $500,000. Restoring 6 officers in the police department. Those positions have been held open since the police contract was settled to fund that contract. We agree that we've talked with the chief and worked through this. The cost to restore that in the operating budget is around $600,000. And then fully funding the sustainability division in DPW. Sustainability is currently funded in part by grants, including a startup grant, a 3-year startup grant that of $750,000 across 3 years, so $250,000 a year. That money expires next year, and once that happens, I will say the sustainability division has done an excellent job of finding money elsewhere and making itself sustainable in many ways. But ultimately, the work that they are doing does require an investment on the operating side. This, the initial ask of 375 also includes money for the sustainable transportation position. I've reduced that here just to the core sustainability functions, which would be around $275,000. So that, those are the baseline big ticket items, and it already puts the town, even if you start making those reductions, at around 5.1, closer to $5.2 million. The entirety of the town's override last time was 4.995. So we're already over where we were last year. And we're not talking about any new services, any new increases. And then you start looking at some of the items that have been identified as priorities. I want to re-emphasize to everyone, this is not final. This is an initial survey of kind of items that I've heard from the community or things of importance. You will get the full list, and it will be this committee's job and task to really look through that and prioritize that accordingly based on your analysis of that information.
Is the senior center number, the one I've heard most often is related to transportation, particularly medical transportation. Is that what that is,
Not
or other things?
That's other things. Medical transportation will be more expensive. This is
That's
about,
what I thought.
Yeah.
So that's not even up there.
that's not even up there yet. That's an order of magnitude bigger, unfortunately.
Yes.
So when we talk about roadway repair, the number that DPW put forward was around 2.8. This assumes that we try and find $1 million there. Across departments, including between town clerk and IT and HR, there's been a real push for digitization of infrastructure. It creates a massive amount of savings in terms of time and money over time. However, it is very expensive to do upfront. Fortunately, in addition to those upfront costs, there are also costs on IT side that they have been shouldering and trying to struggle along as best they can in terms of the increase in costs for licensing fees, the increasing cost for their infrastructure, and they would like to provide additional services on that front to the extent that they can. So an increase in the operating budget that goes during the period of the override digitization and after the period of the override IT is one idea that we're floating out there. All in, the cost for digitization across all departments will be around $750,000. This presumes around a $350,000 amount, which again, once those digitization projects were complete, would rest largely in the IT budget going forward. We talked about senior center operations. This is about ensuring the services that we have are maintained and that they can, for example, increase their supply budget to meet with increasing demand at the senior center itself. This is not, unfortunately, transportation. Parking meter operations, again, a big ticket item that people have mentioned, ensuring that we have effective modern parking meters and that we're not just replacing the meters and ensuring that the technology is up to date there, but that we're also, where possible, thinking about how we consolidate those services. We, take a hard look at enforcement, take a hard look at how the passport system works going forward. And so an increase there will hopefully yield returns and also solve a problem people in the community have been complaining about, which is the issues that arise around parking meters. Public health, human services implementation. One of the big asks from the community has been increased human services out of public health. As part of a broader potential reorganization of the public health department, we would try and fund those efforts, which would include additional funding towards housing stability, given that that is a community ask and something that town meeting has asked us to prioritize. And then there's the select board budget analyst position, which will move from ARPA, which will move off ARPA and onto a town line. Again, this is just an initial menu of options to give you a sense of where the lay of the land is. You can see I stopped at $10.7 million in terms of the asks, at $7 million in terms of what will be looked at there. And we're not even halfway done with the list of requests from townside departments. So when we talked earlier about setting expectations about what we need to keep the lights on and what we need in terms of what the community is asking for, I want us to be realistic in thinking that through, even though I would also say aspirationally, this number, this continuity of service number, we're gonna work as hard as we can to get that number down. But we have to do it in a realistic way. We don't want to be in a position where we were. Where we won't want to be in a position where we are too rosy with our projections and then wind up not asking for enough. And not being unable to meet the obligations there. I'm sorry, I don't know, let's.
I just want to make sure that you also just add that the continuity of service also assumes that we are restoring the policies that we ended up going kind of reducing in order to cover the gap in 26. So
Right.
our CIP policy was shifted downward to provide relief to the operating budget. Our OPEB funding was level funded as a way to provide relief. So the 3.1 is a kind of assuming going back to our fiscal policies and following them fully.
Yeah, and some of the levers that we're thinking of pulling do involve that. So, we will come back to you with options later. But I just want to lay that out.
So, Chief Pastor came with a long list of things that were important to her. If I'm hearing correctly, this doesn't include any of that.
It includes the overtime and it includes restoring the officers, which was her number one priority.
There was a lot.
Okay, but so overtime, if I remember the presentations a few weeks ago for both fire and police, at least at the advisory committee, what you're really doing is you're going to be swapping out money in an override for just money from the reserve fund, because the overtime is going to get realized unless, even the fire chief said if he, with his ideas, he might cut like 150,000.
Mhm.
So if you're cutting 250 of what he's asking for, that's not going to make that difference. And with the police, a lot of their overtime comes as a result of hiring officers.
Mhm.
They kind of go hand in hand.
Right.
And so, I just want people to understand that overtime is probably going to get realized, and it's just going to be dealt with somewhere else in the waterfall or from the reserve fund.
And where possible, we're trying to prevent that, and that's where, we want to be realistic here. But I think that's the other thing that people have to, when we talk about reduction in services, that's going to be one of the areas where we control for overtime, right? The chief already talked about how we used to have the police involved in the rec basketball leagues. That's gone. There are a lot of events that people, we provide a detail for free for, the arts festival, for Art in the Park and all those things. If we can't, we're losing the ability to do that. We can't provide free details to private events the way we used to, even if they're not profit events. So.
And on the roadway repair and maintenance, that's $2.8 million over and above what they currently are receiving.
Yes.
Okay. And so the question that I have about that, and I don't know if I have the answer, the studies that we've gotten in the past, show how if you defer road maintenance, the cost increases exponentially.
Right.
And fast.
Right.
And so, to lop off almost 2/3 of that request, that's really kicking the can down the road. That's going to be very expensive. And I'd like to be good for the committee to sort of have an understanding of what that looks like just a few years down.
And if I could build on that, what does that 2.8 million do? Because the deficit has been huge. So how close does it get to what is ideal funding? So we're not spending more money in the long run. Is that the 2.8 or not?
That is the 2.8.
Okay.
Erin, Commissioner Shute, it was part of her presentation. You can see this is the chart we come back to time and time again on the roads, which is the chart from 2022
Right.
that we've now revised. It shows you those 5 lines, Here's the ideal amount of funding. Here's to get us to improvement. Here's keeping our heads above water. Here is managed decline, and here is falling off the cliff. And we're an extra $1 million will put us somewhere between keeping our heads above water and managed decline. With that said, a part of why that's the opening kind of thought there is there's also a discussion to be had about policy and procedure. It costs more per foot of roadway to do a larger amount of reconstructive work and reimagining work than it would if we cut everything to the bone and said from this period of time, all we are doing is maintaining the roadways as they are. You know, we're not redesigning anything, if we are just repaving everything, then that cost goes down.
So that's the million, just repay.
Well, no, that's what we have to talk about. It's still not, it's still gonna be probably more than that.
I assume that's head above water.
That's head above water, yeah.
So the 2.8 is what you just said,
Is-
keep it smooth and
Right.
do nothing else.
Well, 2.8 would be,
That was
2.8 would be
full
looking at,
yeah.
looking at our current model, right, which it has, right now. The commissioner has done really great work with the consultants and members of the select board, both Paul Warren and then Mike Sandman, when he was on there, did a lot of great work with them. Basically coming up with a policy that bifurcated the complete street policy. So now we have a strong complete street policy for major arterial roadways in places where we know there's a desire for redesign, and we have a more rapidly responsive program for repair and maintenance of roadways that we're not necessarily going to redesign at any given point. And that's a balance that's been struck. The problem obviously is that the costs have gone up. When we did the last override, put $2.1 million into the roadway accounts over 3 years. And the purpose of that was to get us to that head above water point. The problem is, and so a total of around $5 million a year to just for maintenance of the roads as they currently are. The problem is that number is now closer to 80 million. And so even though now thanks to better than expected free cash numbers, we put more money into the roads than even that override suggested. We're closer to 6. We're still below 8. And 8 under our current policies is where we need to be.
I remember when it was 3, which is why I asked the question, because the longer we don't get beyond where we're at, the more expensive it will be.
Right.
To keep us above water.
Right.
If we're even that.
And then there are all of these complexities that play out here, for example, with Washington Street. It's an issue where people are, concerned about the redesign. There's all these concerns about, I'm sure I understand about parking and signage and all of that. But the trade-off there, and the thing that we've been continuing to say, is that sometimes it makes sense to go in for a bigger project because the reward that we are getting from the state and the feds, at least currently, is, something that we simply, $27 million. It's something that we simply wouldn't be able to do on our own. And so in those cases, it's good to have policies in place that anticipate redesign. But then it's just a question of where do you, how, in what direction do you pull that lever? We used to be all the way over it. Every street is going to get redesigned every time we touch it. Now we're somewhere much closer to not every street is going to get redesigned, but some of them are. And so it's a question of how much further over we go.
Is today the day to dig into this, or?
No, but it's a good, I want to hear people's questions so I can go back to the DPW.
Well, let me just focus on 2 questions, and one is police overtime and its relationship to restoring 6 officers.
Yeah.
I may not be remembering correctly, but my understanding was that the hiring of the 6 officers was supposed to mitigate overtime to some extent. Though initially bringing those officers on required overtime,
right,
because they had to be trained.
Right.
Now, if the select board just approved the hiring of a number of officers, I think at your last meeting or the meeting before that, my assumption is that they would be brought on during this fiscal year.
Yes.
And maybe the training would go into FY26.
Yes.
What we're talking about here is FY27, correct?
Correct.
So why is the overtime going up in FY27 when the officers are presumably on board and trained?
So you're still going to have those 6 positions open in FY26. So you're not filling those positions. The 8 that the police chief received authorization to hire for in the last meeting are in addition to those, and they're not all of those positions are currently vacant, right? She was receiving authorization to hire because we are anticipating a number of retirements or people transferring or what have you. And so we're getting that ready to go, teed up. It's not as though we're sitting at a huge number of vacancies currently. Our vacancies are way down. But we're not in a situation, that's not to fill those 6 seats that are open, those 6 spots that are open. Those are still being.
So, okay, so this hiring of 6 officers is going to be in FY 27,
Correct,
and there will be overtime in FY 27.
correct. But that's, a
But
part of
then
where,
presumably after that, that overtime would not be there in FY 28 and 29. It'll be a one-year phenomenon if you fill vacant positions.
that's why, in this initial analysis, the departmental ask is $1 million. And what we have here currently is an assumption of 500,000, because yes, there would be that initial bump because of training, because of all those things, but there are also, what Charlie Young in our office and Liz in the public safety business office is trying to do now is really disentangle the complexity of the police overtime issue, because it's not just one thing. If fire, the issue is simpler. With the
Right.
police, there are multiple different overtime cost centers that the chief is trying to identify, quantify, and then reduce. And so training is one of those overtime centers. Community relations efforts are another. And then there are things that are unrelated to those, for example, court time, where we can do our best at the margins to try and tamp down on the additional hours that an officer may have to spend beyond their shift doing that work, but we're never going to get to 0. And whereas we used to be able to look for savings in other parts of the budget to balance that out, those times are very much over. We don't, for example, have savings in salary anymore to do that. We don't have savings in equipment anymore to do that. Whereas that used to be how departmentally the police department balanced their books at the end of the year. So there's definitely going to be something. There's definitely going to be some delta between where their current overtime budget is and what they're going to be spending on overtime. To Cliff's point, some of that is going to be realized no matter what. But it's our goal to bring that number down from $1 million.
The other question goes to sustainability and the increase. I personally, I think one of the issues that this town faces, any agency faces, is they get a grant, they hire, and it becomes embedded.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you said the sustainability group was raising money. And yet the amount is going up by $100,000. So at some point, I'd like to dig into that.
Yeah, I mean, that position, so sustainability written more broadly, that position is in the transportation division. That's why it's not funded here. So that additional $100,000 is for a sustainable transportation engineer, which
Currently covered by HCA funds
Currently
that they're
covered by
looking to roll into the office.
I'm sorry.
Currently covered by HCA funds, which are going away. So they're looking to preserve the position.
right, so that's a slightly different pot of money that I wanted to consolidate under that banner of
And
sustainability.
it'd be interesting to see what
community.
sort of fund they're being raised.
Marijuana host community.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Always forget that one.
Yeah, and we have that data. We can get that to you.
Okay.
What's the title of this proposed town override? What's that next word?
Second,
What's the
Yeah.
title of the?
Yeah.
Thank you.
asks.
Draft, thank you.
Would it be fair to assume then the more complex we read these streets, the higher cost for R&M?
Yes,
So to the extent that you're saying we're narrowing down our focus of anything we do, other than straight smoothing, line painting for, major arterial roadways, we might want to consider the fact that even on major arterial roadways, if we're narrowing complete streets down while it's aspirational to keep costs down, we probably want to go to the simplest options that we have. I'm not sure where DPW stands on that, but just because the state might give us money is not a reason to put in a more expensive roadway that down the road is going to cost us more money to maintain. If it has a lot of other extra, doodads all around and cutouts and separate lanes and, separate trees and everything. It's the whole thing, the way out to the sidewalks. Second thing I was going to say is, on the school side, the questions that we sent, to Bill and the team. There were like two areas, you haven't put anything in for school yet, but the two that popped in mind, I mean, a circuit breaker and a Medicaid are gonna be just per student, so there's no revenue there really. We're just asking to get money back, but on the tuition in possibility and on building usage fees or something are really the only two areas I saw in there that potential revenue generators, but they're not at this scale. So it's gonna be, 3 digits or 4 digits, certainly not even
Right.
5.
I mean, I can, yeah.
The other thing about overtime on the fire side, in discussions that I've had last yearish, it overtime to me seemed more like a I don't know the right way to say it, employee driven rather than process driven.
That's fair.
And I think the chief in a conversation may have mentioned to me that that's a tough thing to battle when you get a call in the morning saying, I'm not coming into work. And as a result, you have to bring in someone else who's off and pay them overtime. And in the future, the other person may call it just for any reason, really. I just don't feel well today. And then the other person comes in on overtime. And if this just keeps going, then, that's why there was $1 million, I think, at town meeting that we talked about just for overtime. So with the short, with taking down one person in the count of people that go out and still having this overtime issue, all the other things about people out on injury for long periods of time and paternity leave, long periods of time. I get all that, but there's something else, going on if it's employee driven that we really shouldn't be covering the cost of that as a town. We need a way to get out of that business.
And I think, the chief, I think, has done a good job in terms of monitoring that. We've monitored sick time abuse, we're monitoring that. And one of the big things that we said when we settled this contract with the union was, we're gonna work together on this, right? If you don't want us to reduce the number of people who go out on runs, then something has to change.
Right.
So a culture has to shift here. And we need to be in the business of showing up to work and doing that stuff. And again, I don't want to disparage the firefighters. They do incredible work. And, it's not, I don't think there's a culture of not wanting to do the job. I just think that there are differing priorities and differing mindsets in terms of how leave is used, that we have to work collaboratively to change. And that's what we're working on. Other initial questions here?
So there was some conversation around IT and sort of infrastructure licenses, around sort of consolidation, and some potential cost savings.
Yes.
To result in that. I'm curious to what extent that's factored in here. Obviously, there's an incremental ask for fiscal 27, but theoretically there was a cost savings on the other side of that.
Yes.
I know that there's more work to be done. You're still getting information, but I assume that, we heard all the presentations, people thought through what the cost savings were. So I assume there's kind of another side to this, or is this sort of largely the big ticket items that don't?
So that portion of it is not in here yet. That's actually a conversation I want to have with the smaller group about,
Great.
because that's part of the revenue sharing
Yeah.
and consolidated services conversation that we should be having. Because there's this question now of how much separately are we providing,
Right.
where's there opportunity to collapse that? And also where's there an opportunity to, for example, right now we pay for Zoom for everyone. But we also, because of our Office 365 subscriptions, some people have Teams licenses. That's redundant. Should we just shift to Teams? Problem is the schools can't shift to Teams because they're not on Office 365 or 365. So we gotta kind of
That feels like
pull plugs and plug them back in, trying to figure out how we route that, and make that work. So that's what Fung is thinking about currently in terms of how to find savings there, while not impacting either town or school operations. We're not going to shift if it's going to wreck something on either side. Are you okay for us to talk a little bit about some of the initial revenue opportunities that we've been analyzing? Pull this up too. So we're still at the very initial stages of trying to cost these things out. But to Jesse's point, right, we're looking at costs in the millions, but the amount of revenue we're generating from this initial analysis is still around $600,000. It is not, but with that said, these are conservative projections, and it doesn't include some of those broader potential opportunities for consolidation. Those are really broader questions that I think the revenue sharing model team has to look at. So these are just off the bat things that we're looking at. If we were to increase building permit fees or by 5%, I think Dan Bannon estimates we would make, you see, roughly for every 1% you increase them, you'd make between $40,000 and $50,000. I took that and actually ran it down to assume the 5% increase at $35,000 because I would assume there would be some reduction in building permits being issued. I think that's true anyway. We're going to see those numbers go down. So that's a very conservative estimate on 5%. And again, any sort of increase in these fees has to be justified by the work that we're doing, right? Fees are not a revenue source. Fees are to be assessed for the cost of doing business. Now, on our end, the cost of doing business has gone up, so it makes sense to talk about a fee increase, but we can't treat fees like a cash cow. We have to treat fees just proportional to the service that we are providing. The potential for reviewing personal property. Lincoln, you want to talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, thank you, Chaz. So personal property is a quick reminder for folks who may not know. So personal property is not real estate. It is property that is owned by a business or taxed as an industrial zone for movable equipment. So think, for example, in a medical office, the medical equipment there, in a restaurant, the ovens, the other pieces of equipment there. So those items are assessed and taxed at the same rate as commercial and industrial property. It's not something that is, typically our assessing staff is, for the most part, focused on real estate because that's the big cash cow, and that is, primarily their area of expertise. There is a company known as RRC, who specializes in examining personal property valuations for municipalities. We've contracted with them. We knew that we could up some of our values, and that our values, could be higher. It just was requiring work that staff doesn't necessarily have the complete expertise or time to do. So we are seeing we had some nominal savings in fiscal 25. We applied those to do some contracting with RRC, and we've had positive results so far in seeing higher valuations that we think are defendable. So we do think that investing some more money into contracting with RRC would likely result in some new growth, which effectively new growth through more updated personal property valuations.
Is this a net figure?
Yes, it's very much an estimate. It's based simply on what the funds, the additional funds that we were able to invest in this for fiscal 25, what we were able to realize on average per assessment. So this is sort of based on if everything is re-examined that needs to be, and that average holds going forward as we hopefully invest some more money in those reviews.
Other questions on that one?
Yeah, I think Dick was starting to touch on a question when he asked whether these numbers were net. In other words, if we're paying a consultant to help us, has that already been calculated in your number?
Yes. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Helping you clarify. Sorry, but
Yeah.
yes, it's certainly a very preliminary estimate, but we do know that there's some revenue there.
And then I think the second comment that I would suggest is that by the time the numbers get to 25,000 and below, aren't we kind of fooling ourselves that just the rollout and the implementation and the change in the forms and everything else would seem to me to be very likely to chew all that up. And so I'm left asking a different question, which is, I'm frankly surprised at how low the estimates are for things like parking meters.
That's intentional, right? These are very preliminary, intentionally low numbers, right? Because these are things that we have to really, particularly the parking fines, right? Because that's an area where there are several different models at play. It's one thing to just say, okay, we're going to raise parking fees because of the cost of implementation. It would be another thing if we said we're going to fundamentally revamp how we do parking collection. If we so I want us to go with the lowest estimate possible here currently, so that we're not then, to your point, fooling ourselves into thinking we've got a source of money that we don't have.
And these are violation notices. These are not meter fees. These are fees for violating parking rules.
Got it? Yeah. Thank you for those clarifications. At the level that you're operating at, what happened to our dog fees?
Green Dog program is currently under review, actually. But yes, dog licensing there's a potential for that.
I don't know. Thank you. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
I remember Dick had once about the revenue.
John, let's get his hand up.
Oh, hi. I've got a question. I'm looking at the later driving range hours under recreation. Isn't that part of the Golf Enterprise Fund and really wouldn't reflect in the general fund savings that would require dedicated monies that are only for golfing? So I'm wondering whether that really should be included in the list.
So the rec estimated that they would see around $200,000 in increased revenue in the event that the golf course could stay open, the driving range could stay open until 10. And the thought there was that potentially with whatever creative accounting techniques we could use, some of the funds that are currently being used on the general fund side to help fund operations in the rec department could be then shifted elsewhere and taken up by Golf Enterprise. So that's a very initial estimate, but you're right, you're exactly right. But the rec's initial estimate was 200,000. And so our thought was that we could realize even less than half of that by moving things around in enterprise. We would find a way to do that.
And also I'm a little concerned about requires capital. I think this goes back to Sergio's point. We're going to chew up, it's going to cost us a lot of money before we see any dividends.
That is correct. It will cost money upfront. It's coming out of the capital budget. It's projects that otherwise wouldn't be funded. And not to put too fine a point on it, it requires putting lights on the driving range. And when that's come up in the past, people have said no. So it's an option, but it's not.
Who said no? I mean,
People who live nearby.
knows that.
Rich, right?
Oh, really?
With the light shine in his eyes.
That's right. Excellent.
Red the light, so that doesn't.
Associate States, sorry.
Oh, Sergio? Sergio, you have your hand up? Or is that John Dogger?
That's John Doggett.
Yeah, I just was, there's another point that maybe it's the right time to raise it here. That there is a revenue item that we're not considering currently and was considered at the last town meeting, which was the real estate transfer tax. And that raises potentially somewhere in the 14, 15 million range. I mean, you're talking about serious money to fill a serious gap. As I understood it, I understand it, I think it was reduced to 50% would go to the trust fund, the housing trust fund, and 50% would go to the general fund. To be quite honest, I think that should, I've always felt that we should see that going to the town first. And if the town wants to spend whatever it wants out of that newfound revenue stream, assuming the state allows it to come onto the line, that we would basically, the town would have the option to spend more on the trust fund or not. However, but I still think that even at the moment that's on the table potentially, although it's got to go through a lot of hurdles and it probably won't see the light of day. But I'm just wondering from a standpoint when we come to a final report here is to get behind, have to take a look at that issue and perhaps decide or decide not to get behind recommending some form of that, because it's the only, as far as I can see, it's the only real way in which we can raise a substantial sum of money without going for an override.
These are all fees that we have under our control currently.
Right, I mean, that's the thing, the legislature has not moved favorably on transfer fees yet, transfer taxes yet. You know, they did finally move on brokers fees, for example, banning tenant paid brokers fees, so I wouldn't say never, but it is definitely something that's not unfortunately in our control.
I fully understand this, but I'm just wondering again. Look, I'm looking ahead here to report. If and an assumption that the committee has sat and discussed this point and come up with some kind of view on it. And I think that we should, even though it may take a long time to implement, it may be a long time in coming, and it may not be a now thing. Certainly not going to be on the May election. It won't affect next year's budget. So, but nonetheless, I think it would be an important point to raise in the public debate on this so that we get behind. I personally would like to see us get behind some form of that revenue raising mechanism, because I think it solves our problem. And so why wouldn't we take a look at it, at least have an opinion on it, or the version that we'd like to see? So we join the debate, or at least recommend and support, and that or not. As I say, I don't want to predict where we would come out on this, but I think it's, I know it's a bit of hypothetical, but on the other hand, it's a real thing.
I guess one question I would have is that really an appropriate thing for the committee to be doing. Throw that out.
You know, I think you've alluded to the issue, and that is, if you're talking about FY 27, 28, 29, and the legislature has to approve this, and they haven't had an appetite for doing that, is that realistically a substitute?
What if you historically we've gone like an override for 3 years, right? So if you're going to bring something on the ballot that's going to assume you're going to be raising revenue over a period of time, you can't count on something like that. It's
Right.
sort of like,
I remember when we were counting taxi medallion fees.
yeah.
And that gave way to marijuana.
What
Was going to some. Taxi medallions.
What is that?
Right. And, you know, and marijuana was our salvation. So I think we need to be more, it's sort of almost at the level of, well, we'll just increase pilots. Which is maybe more realistic, and we never had a lot of faith in that.
That's, you can see that's not on this list,
Yeah.
because we're squeezing it's not from a stone, but there are nonprofits out there. But of them, you know, the big ones that are out there that have not historically contributed, are not inclined to contribute, or certainly not inclined to contribute money. The big question mark right now is Northeastern, but you know, BC, no, you know, those, you know, and then we have smaller, you know, nonprofits out there who are willing to do non-monetary deals with us, you know, but like we lost our pilot with Beaver over the parking dispute. And that's the other thing, is that those things are unfortunately subject sometimes to pressures beyond our control.
To actually give some weight to what John is saying, when you're talking about the sort of numbers that you're talking about here, I think an override is probably also not very realistic at this level. So,
I'm gonna throw out one that, you know, is gonna be very controversial, but you know, we've set a funding date for retirement of 2030. We've got 10 extra years, and you know, whether it's trying to find a way to slow that 7.5% increase per year over the next few years. Or come 2030, if we're fully funded, which it seems like assuming we are, instead of rolling 100% of that into OPEBs, which there is no deadline, and there's a lot of schools of thought that basically OPEBs should be pay as you go. Then there's a lot of money, and that we should be thinking along how that can be used. And one of the things it might be able to be used for would actually be to go back and reduce tax burden.
I mean, I think we're actually, the select board is going to be discussing that tomorrow, that policy. And having that. What I will say there is, our recommendation is now, especially given that we're so close on this, that once you open that door, it's hard to close it, right? So I agree with you that we should have the conversation, but from that's drinking from a tainted well, right? Once you start doing that, you can't stop. I mean, I look at what happened in Newton. Newton had a failed operating override. And in order to make some ends meet, they are now engaged in a practice of creative accounting where they say, well, our pension is going to be fully funded by such and such date. I think they're 2032, somewhere out there. Yeah. And therefore, we can take money from free cash when we get it and treat it like operating money, because really that's going to be operating money in 2032. So they are mortgaging the future to pay for the present. And I worry getting into exercises like that, then, really does mortgage our future, limits our options. And our concern, we're going to talk about with the select board in more detail tomorrow, is that what do we have control over when it comes to our credit rating, our bond rating? It's some of those things we have a lot of control over, things we don't. The one thing that we have the most control over is our reserves. And so it would make a lot of sense when the pension liability is settled, to roll some of that into OPEBs, but some of that into reserves, to the point where we can meet our goal of being at the median of AAA funded communities in Massachusetts. But that would require, a shift in how we treat our reserve funding.
How much of that is under the control of the retirement board? They're responsible for the pension. Do they also weigh in on the OPEBs?
So there is a separate OPEB trust fund board, which consists of the members of the retirement board and 2 other select board appointees.
But the OPEB funding is under the jurisdiction of the town.
Yeah, correct.
That's the jurisdiction.
Town meeting essentially decides what to annually appropriate into the OPEB.
And the pension is under the direct control of the retirement.
So the pension funding schedule, for example, so the state law requires that you be fully funded by fiscal year 2040.
Right.
But the actual date is based on a decision of the Brookline Retirement Board.
Of the Brookline Retirement Board. So if we
the actual date, before 2040, if it is to be before 2040.
Right. So the select board, that was really my question. The select board doesn't decide that, town meeting doesn't decide that. In conjunction with the retirement board, it's a request that could be made to them that they look at.
Right, that's correct.
Okay, let's hope the stock market keeps going up.
And I will say the retirement board and the retirement team have done a very good job of managing the realities of it, trying to project down interest rates where we don't think we're going to have a good year, but we're still projecting, what's
6.8% rate of return. We have been at 6.9, but we're realizing, as most, if not all, of the municipalities, when they're funding their pension schedule, bring down the rate of return a little bit, because obviously it's more sensitive also as you're reaching your full funding.
So I had a question earlier.
Go ahead.
On the question of revenues, the chart you put together, as you pointed out, are things that are essentially within your control now. John raised one that was not. A couple of months ago, I raised another idea, which I think we ought to at least talk about. And that is whether the opportunity for some solar investments, which could then offset current budgets for the purchase of electricity, would be worth thinking about. And I had gone so far as to suggest in that document that, unlike most overrides where we ask the taxpayer for money, a solar based override, that is for the purpose of making solar investments, actually provides the taxpayer with a return on investment. And I would suggest that this is a revenue source, a new revenue source. I got no replies at the time. Perhaps it's worth talking about for a few minutes.
Sure, and I think we can follow up on this as well next week. You know, I know on the sustainability side, Alexandra has been doing a lot of thinking about that. We've inventoried we've done an initial inventory of the areas where we might be able to put solar panels in. And as you know, the gap between, oh, that's a flat space, we can do that, and turns out it's more complicated, is significant. You know, we have new buildings, so New Driscoll is obviously a site, which is good. New Pierce is going to have some opportunities potentially, but you even think about things like, oh, the library here. The library has a big roof, but the library's roof is tiered. It's not as easy to build solar panels there, especially when you've got some of the HVAC on the rooftop there. The transfer center, people will always talk about, well, there's that big open space in the transfer center surrounded by.
Everything you're saying is true. Let me just give you some reference points. The Driscoll array produces roughly $50,000 a year in current value. So compared to some of the things on your list, I'd suggest that it might be worth adding.
Oh, yeah.
And I would add to that that one should not think about this as being necessarily building related. Let me give you an example. We have a landfill site. We could certainly put panels there. Yes, the economics are a little different. But I think what I'm simply saying here is that there's an opportunity which merits an examination. And it becomes a question of a policy for the town. I also recognize that it may not happen quickly enough to materially impact our current 3-year time horizon. But if we don't be thinking about it, we won't have it 3 years from now. That's it. Thank you.
Okay.
Consolidate school legal services.
Yeah, so we haven't tried to realize savings from consolidation of services in this discussion because we haven't caught that. And we're still talking about what a lot of that would look like as a from an operational standpoint. The one area where we have done some of that work is on the legal side. And the thought there that Joe has worked with and that, that we've gone back and forth with a couple of times is that if we were to pull over some of the legal services onto the town side of the budget and have an assessment for that, there might be the opportunity to realize some of those costs, to realize some of those benefits to a net tune of maybe around $100,000. So we'd see some savings there, so we could then be able to move forward on that front. But it would be the goal is also to hit, that's part of the savings that would be realized on the school side. So ideally, the schools would be realizing most of that savings, and that there would be an assessment for the attorney time spent on the school side. Right now, you can see in the memo that's in the subcommittee file, right now, currently, roughly one full-time employee of Joe's team is currently being utilized exclusively on school issues, and there's no assessment there. So thinking about how to break that out and provide savings for the school department for money they're not spending on outside counsel, and then savings on our end from being able to assess the hours that we're spending on school-related matters. That's kind of where that balance is at. But that assumes that one FTE, right? That assumes that, and there are really three services that the schools rely on for legal counsel. You know, the sort of day-to-day affairs, which the town is trying to handle as much as possible for currently. There's special education, which is a specialized area of service where there's more concern about bringing someone on to do that kind of work in a specialized environment. That's another FTE. That's another person you really will need someone to handle that full time, someone experienced to handle that full time, and not all communities do that. I'll contract that out. And then there's labor relations. Really, and when I say labor relations, I mean collective bargaining. And that's an area where historically the school committee has said they want to retain their current counsel. And so we're trying to, we're saying, okay, so we're not touching that.
That's not a full-time employee anyway.
Right.
That is episodic.
Right. Right, but it's also predictable, in the sense that we roughly know how much we spend on mediation services when collective bargaining comes around.
So for special education, so I understand that is, you use outside counsel for that, schools use outside counsel for that.
Yes. So again, these are low estimates on revenues and high estimates on costs, because we want to be as realistic as possible, and not assume the best, only to have the worst happen. But the next step on our end is getting you that full list of the initial asks from departments, and giving you a sense of what that goes for, descriptions from the departments. But we're just in the process now of truing all that out so that you have an accurate assessment of where that money comes from. We want to talk about that next week in conjunction with prioritization, kind of cross-departmental prioritization, conversations from our office about where we see those needs and how we prioritize them. And also talk a little bit about where we see the opportunity for reductions in service and consolidation. Mindful that I think the bulk of that discussion is going to have to happen when schools are open.
And sorry, in 2 weeks.
2 weeks, thank you.
May I ask a broader question? Looking at comparable communities, comparable school districts in terms of the services they provide, the programs they provide, the ones they have that we don't have, the ones that we have that they don't have, direct services versus administrative overhead, capital costs, and so forth. Do you see yourselves doing any of that comparison to other communities?
So we have done comparisons of how certain services are provided and where those rest in the budget. We've done that through the lens now of shared services, right? This question of where are we, what level of service do we provide versus what other communities provide in terms of that work. And through that, we have identified certain areas where we provide more than other communities. For example, groundskeeping, maintenance and upkeep, maintaining the tree canopy. We spend a lot on those efforts because we have a lot of green space and that's a community priority. But we haven't undertaken a comprehensive analysis comparing, each department's operations to others. One of the areas that I'm focused on currently is operational efficiencies when compared to other communities. So I'm looking at particularly things like inspectional services, like public health, like public buildings, thinking about what level of service other communities provide and the structure of how they're provided, to see where we can realize some savings there. I'm not quite ready to have those conversations. They're still very much in their early phases, but that's an area of focus for me really in the next year and a half. Is where I would like to see us try and not just compare ourselves to other communities, but try and better our operations and make it more efficient.
Clearly on the town side, the probably the bigger ticket would be police, fire, DPW, as opposed to inspection services.
I mean, you're not wrong. Yes, those are the big ticket items, and on the DPW side, we have done some of that work and, also a part of the big exercise with fire minimum staffing was that exact argument. But the communities, the voice of the community was, we want what we want.
Right. But there is the needs versus wants issue.
Oh, I know.
When you start looking at numbers like this.
When they want, are they presented with numbers same time, or is it just want?
I mean, I think, that conversation was very frank, right? We said, this is the difference between a ladder company in South Brookline or not. Right now, I mean, we will do the analysis, we will work with the union, we will work with the fire chief, we will do what we can, but we're not looking at a ladder company in South Brookline. Like, we're looking at an overage of close to $1 million in the budget as it stands. How are we gonna afford that? It's not realistic. We still want to do the analysis and the work because we think it's important, but these are the trade-offs that we make as a community. And we did try and present that as clearly as possible in those conversations. We said, really, this is the only way you're going to get that. And the response was, okay, we'll do that. Yeah. So that's, yeah, we got the 5:30 subcommittee meeting. But in the interim, I know more questions are likely to come up. We will circulate that document of departmental asks next week. And we will get that to you. And as you have questions, please let us know so that we can come prepared to answer them in 2 weeks' time.
Because we're not generating like really a lot of conversation each time, a little bit more presenting. Do we have a method in which we're deciding the issues that we would like to come back to? Or are you keeping track of that? And will we just come back to everything, or are we ruling some things out as we discuss?
So I think next week is really the opportunity for us to try and funnel that. I want to have a broad sense of your questions and feedback so that we can then focus our discussion. We can have time to focus those discussions, because really that's drilling down. We've now had the presentation of the information, what the departments do, how all that happens. Now is the time to drill down and think about where our focus is.
And have you thought about your strategy for going through that? Will we tend to vote, what to keep, or is it just sort of we're going to kind of come to some consensus that we discussed?
How we did this last time, which I thought was helpful, was talking about it in terms of priorities, ranking your priorities, thinking about getting a sense from the group of what matters, trying to build that consensus. That's, for example, how the 2023 override evolved into one that was really transportation for one, at least on the town side. And so I think similar conversations will happen here, and that will go through several, my team will then go back and iterate on those conversations and say, what we're hearing from you is these priorities, looking at it this way, here's a menu of options. Of these options, what do you like and why? Where are you not seeing your priorities focused? And then we just refine it from there. So it starts broad and it funnels down until we hit the proposed ones.
So, let's see, we were gonna talk about cost benefits, and I'll just figure.
That's kind of where we're aiming to go through next week. In the next 2 weeks. That's the information that the departments are we're trying to drill down on in the departmental submissions to make sure that we've got that.
Okay, is there anything else?
Next meeting is Monday, August 11th at 4 p.m.
Right. And the next meeting of the subcommittee is in 2 minutes. Great.
So you're welcome to stick around. You don't have to if you're not on the subcommittee.
I'll take offense if I don't stay around. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.